Welcome to Entry Point Faith. Join us each week to discover fresh meaning in the world and find faith your way. Now, here is Pastor Nancy Lafferty.
In 1957, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. stood in front of a crowd of people in Montgomery, Alabama, and said these words: "Life's most persistent and urgent question is, what are you doing for others?" And it still rings true today and every day. Implicit in those words of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. is the awareness that other people sometimes need help. And sometimes there's nobody around who knows them. The only people around are perfect strangers. There are countless times that I have been aided by complete strangers in my lifetime. 3 times, fellow travelers have stopped and changed a flat tire for me. Many, many times, people I don't even know have given their time and their money and their abilities to help me out of a jam. And I would like to think that I've done the same thing for other people. Well, not the changing tire part, but the other stuff. When those people have assisted me, they were superheroes, and their superpower is love. Somewhere inside of each person who has ever come to my rescue over my lifetime is the acknowledgement that helping other people is important. They each possess the ability to love other people. You might say they learned to love their neighbor. Now, this isn't new information to you. We've all heard all of our lives that we're supposed to help other people when we can. If we've attended church for any length of time, we heard the verse from the Bible where Jesus told us to love our neighbors. The verse is found in the book of Mark, and it goes like this: "Love your neighbor as you love yourself." Now, before we go any further, I want to clarify something about the Bible. If you struggle to make sense of it, why are there so many books? Why are they arranged that way? Is there some sort of order to this thing? Look at it this way. A simple way to frame and understand the Bible is this. There are 2 sections. The first part is the Old Testament. It is about a little more than half of the Bible, and it is the history of the Jewish people. And the second part of the Bible is the New Testament, writings that incorporate the teachings of Jesus. Now, many scholars agree that the depiction of God in the Old Testament is somewhat of a harsh, demanding judge. But once we get to the New Testament, Jesus is there, and Jesus is all about love. And although we've all grown up in a culture that tells us to love other people, this was an incredible, radical idea when Jesus first said this. Jesus telling people to love other people was unbelievable. Telling people to love their enemies, that was unheard of. So once Jesus arrives and starts leading and teaching, everything is about love. So we're supposed to love our neighbors. A Pharisee asked Jesus, "Who is my neighbor?" And in typical Jesus style, there was no direct answer to the question, but instead there was a parable told. Jesus told the Pharisee the parable of the Good Samaritan. You've probably heard that story before. It's the story of a man who was attacked by robbers while he was traveling on the road to Jericho. He was stripped of his clothes and he was beaten and left for dead. Sounds like a news item out of today. Soon after, a priest was walking along the same road. Actually, right after he had done a service. And when he saw the man, he crossed the street. He went to the other side of the road to avoid the guy. And of course, he walked past the injured man. And then a second person came along, a Levite came along, and he too walked to the other side of the street when he saw the guy laying there. But a Samaritan came along, and when he saw the man, he took pity on him. He tended to his wounds. He carried him on his donkey. He brought him to an inn, and he took care of him. He even left some money for the innkeeper to continue the man's care when the Samaritan had to leave the next day. Now, a detail that is important in this story is that Jews and Samaritans were enemies during this time. And even though they were enemies, the Samaritan tended the Jewish man who had been robbed and beaten. So after telling the story, Jesus asked the Pharisee which one of the three men he thought was a neighbor to the man who was robbed. Wisely, the Pharisee replied, "The man who showed mercy." Jesus said, "Yes, go and do likewise." So who are our neighbors? Those who live near us, those who live down the street, in the same apartment building, those who we are in community with and those we aren't, those who live in our neighborhood and those who don't, those who work with us, go to school with us, work in our coffee shop, those we know and those whose names we will never know, those who live in our city, in our state, in our country, in our continent, in our world. As Billy Graham has said, everyone is our neighbor who lives on this little planet. Last week, I talked with you about loving yourself. And that's a good thing, because when we look at the instructions about loving our neighbors, there's that interesting caveat about how we are to love our neighbors, as we love ourselves. So there's proof that it's important to love ourselves, take care of ourselves, honor ourselves, because if we can do that, then we can love our neighbors, we can take care of our neighbors, we can honor our neighbors, because we know what that feels like, and we know what it takes to do it. Knowing how to love our neighbors is like any other life skill. We need to practice it. We aren't born thinking about the needs of other people, recognizing that other people have needs. I'm not sure that Oscar is thinking about my needs right now. He is not capable of doing that. We learn from role models, from being helped ourselves, or from some of life's humbling moments. There are 4 qualities of loving that I would like us to touch on just for a moment, that we need to do in order to love our neighbors. And the first one is compassion. Compassion is an action. It's not just a sympathetic feeling. Compassion means to care. It comes because we see ourselves in the other person's situation. We know a little bit about what that feels like. And we know they're in a tough spot, so we care. Kindness is the second quality. Kindness is a blanket of grace that we gently wrap around each person. We never know what someone is going through. People hide their pain all the time. The only reality in their life is their reality. When we are kind, we take the high road. We show a softer side of ourselves. We give people a break. We show love. Sharing is the next quality that we need to have in order to love our neighbor. When we recognize that someone needs something, and if we are able, we just share what we have. We share food, we share clothing, we share our money, we see a need and we fill it by sharing. Finally, loving our neighbor involves service. when we're able to serve our neighbors, humbly placing their needs over ours, walking their dog, tending them when they are sick, cooking for them, helping them in any way that we are able, we are demonstrating love in action. When we serve our neighbors, we show them love. On November 13th, 1985, the engine of a boat carrying 96 Vietnamese refugees across South China Sea sputtered and failed. It stopped working. These boat people were crammed together onto a rickety boat, and they could see a tropical storm headed their way. For 4 days, they had watched ships pass by. 1, 2, 3, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 ships had passed them when the 51st ship came along. The refugees waved and screamed and clamored in vain, just as they had done the previous 50 times. The South Korean fishing ship traveled on, but stopped and turned around 10 minutes later, decided to come back to save them. As the ship approached them, the captain could see the dire condition that the people were in. He called his sailors together because it was against company policy to pick up boat people. But the captain told him he would take responsibility. The refugees were rescued, and all was well. Not long after, the captain was fired for picking up the boat people because it was against company rule. He couldn't find another captain's job, and he had to survive by living off his savings and helping out some people, some friends in their businesses. On August 8th, 2004, 19 years after this dramatic boat rescue, hundreds of people in the Vietnamese community of Westminster gathered to honor this ship's captain. Of the captain, one survivor said, "He has the biggest heart. Without his rescue, we would have all died, all 96 of us." The captain shrugged off the compliments and said, "Well, if I hadn't done it, somebody else would have. I was a fisherman for 25 years, and I caught a lot of fish. But catching and saving the boat people was the most important thing I've ever done." The captain of that South Korean fishing ship exemplified all of the qualities that should be part of our efforts to love our neighbors. He was compassionate. He was kind. He shared what he had, and he served complete strangers. May we all strive to use our superpower like Captain Jiang did. May we love our neighbors as we love ourselves. Amen.
Thanks for listening in on this week's discussion on Entry Point Faith. You can join the Entry Point Faith community in person every Sunday at 10:30 a.m. at Conner Prairie in Fishers, Indiana. For more information and a transcript of Nancy's messages, visit entrypointonline.org. Entry Point Faith is brought to you in partnership with mypodcast.media.